Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien.
Something like to truly love, and that's Rita Frost. So let's give it up for Rita first. We came in so we could make the name Varian Fry known throughout this country as this great man really deserves.
Rabbi, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for making the effort to come today, and I thank my congregation for allowing me the time to present this talk about Varian Fry. Now, I have a question for you. How many, before you saw the advertisement about this program, knew or heard of Varian Fry? Okay, that's why I'm here. I did not see every hand up, and this is what bothers me. Why? Because Varian Fry is the American Oscar Schindler. Everybody knows Oscar, and we know why, because of the film. But Varian Fry was our neighbor, right here in Fairfield County. He lived in Richfield, he taught in Wilton, lived in Easton, taught at the Joe Barlow School, went to school, all in three schools here in Connecticut. In essence, he loved Connecticut, and it really bothers me that he's not a household word in this particular part of Connecticut. Now I'm going to break this up. There is so much, and you'll have to forgive me if sometimes I'm redundant, but it's such a fascinating story, so I'm breaking this up in different sections. The first 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you how Varian Fry went from being a nerd to a hero, and not knowing anything about underground work. And then I will take you, I wish I really could, but to Marseille, but you really would not want to be there at that time. The film is 26 minutes long. It's sometimes hard to understand because of the accents. And then after the film, I will tell you his fate when he returned to our country. So we'll begin now. Varian Fry was born in Harlem in 1907, October, for those who people are interested in astrology. So he, at a very young age, the family moved to Ridgewood, where he was raised. He had a father who was a stockbroker, modest income, and his mother was often sick. So he was raised by his two maiden aunts. His favorite and most influential person was his grandfather, Charles, who ran an orphanage in Brooklyn. And very often, Varian Fry spent time with his grandfather, and at an early age developed sensitivities to the homeless children. At 14, he went to school where? Right a half hour away from us in Lakeville, Hotchkiss, the elite school. Now, to paint a picture of Varian Fry, he loved books at a very young age, very bright, loved birding. He had very few friends, and he was spoiled, a little obstinate, and so there he goes off to school to Hotchkiss. Soon, he's very dismayed with the school. He doesn't like being bullied by the older kids. And on top of that, he does not like the hazing practice that Hotchkiss has. So he goes off to the headmaster. And the headmaster says, this is our tradition. So Varian Fry is no longer at Hotchkiss, but another school. Not in Texas or New Hampshire, but in Watertown, Connecticut, the Taft School. Again, raised here, schooled here. And then we find afterwards he's a Harvard graduate. While he's at Harvard, he majors in the classics, especially Latin and Greek. There's some seats up front also. So he also, with a friend, forms a literary magazine, which tells you all about the latest literary giants of Europe and in our own country, and also the latest authors. When he graduates Harvard, he marries a woman by the name of Eileen, 6 years older than he, and from Boston. And she's also a writer. They both move to New York City, where they feel they can get work. It's 1935, it's the Depression. His first job is as a journalist, and he had an assignment to go to Berlin. And that assignment was to shape and change the course of his life. He went to Berlin to report on the political climate. The first day he was there, that evening actually, on the Kuffersum, which is equal to our Fifth Avenue, forgive my pronunciation, and he saw throngs of young Germans chanting very horrible things to the Jews, and if they saw a Jew, they were pushed and shoved and bloodied. And then he went into a cafe to have a drink, and there's a man who was obviously Jewish and getting very frightened as these mobs come in, and they took a knife and nailed this man's hand to the table. Well, Varian Fry long had that in his mind when he was shaken. The next day, he had an appointment with an Ernst Hansnagel, who was also a graduate of Harvard. He graduated 10 years before Varian Fry. And he wanted to kind of show off that he was a big thing in Goebbels' propaganda office. And Fry just let him talk to make him relax, to let him see what he's going to say. Well, he was talking about old times at Harvard. But then he revealed to Varian Fry what Hitler had in mind for the Jews. And that was to have them transported to another country or to exterminate them. And we know he chose the latter. So that very night, Fry sent a telegraph back to his newspaper, and it was headlines in many papers and the New York Times. So, ladies and gentlemen, in 1935, Varian Fry was telling everyone what Hitler had in mind. The next 5 years, Varian Fry kept himself busy writing articles, etc. But now we come to June 1940, when Hitler is marching into France. Now, the climate at that time, most Europeans who could escape, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Lithuania, if they could get out, they tried to go to France. And when Hitler went into the northern part of France, they had to escape to Vichy, France. Now, what is Vichy, France? Vichy, France, at the time that the Germans occupied the northern part, Vichy is a small, boring little spa town. But it's located in the middle, and you'll see by the movie exactly from a map. And anything north of Vichy was occupied by the Germans. So therefore, not only the refugees who had gotten to Paris, they knew they had to get out. So at this point, there had to be a committee, because they were very, very concerned, a lot of intellectuals, the Modern Museum of Art, that they knew the elite of the intelligentsia and the artists and writers of Europe were on that list. So a committee was formed, this is 1940, at the old Commodore Hotel on 42nd Street. And they meet And they want to get visas to these people. So they're arguing, they finally come up with a list of 200 names. They approached Eleanor Roosevelt because they knew the president did not want to get involved with the war in Europe. So she pleads the case to her husband, listen, if we don't allow these top cultural icons out, if we don't help them, it will be criminal on our part. And so he agreed to get 200 visas to this list. However, he wanted it underground, he wanted it done in 3 weeks. So at least they got that far. And in case I forgot, the name of the committee was the Emergency Rescue Committee. Later, we all know it as the International Rescue Committee that operates today. But that was the beginning of it. So now they had to find someone to take these passports and find them because they were hidden all throughout France. So Varian Fry went to this meeting. When he heard and saw the names on this list, he couldn't believe it. These were the very cultural icons that he had studied at Harvard, and he felt in his heart that this was his destiny, and he had to save them. So he volunteered. He did have some of the qualifications, which was knowing some, so of course he knew English. He had to know some French, some German, political climate, and he had to know the artists. So he did fulfill that. Everyone really wasn't 100% sure he was the right one, and he wasn't sure. But there was no one else. So they raised $3,000, which was a lot of money in 1940, and off Varian Fry went in August. And he had the funds and cash strapped to his under his leg, because it was illegal to carry that kind of money. He was 32 at the time, tall, horn-rimmed glasses, lanky, nattily dressed, and also he had qualities that really worked for him. He was a very quiet man, also very humble, even when he returned to this country. And all that got him under the radar of the Gestapo. He had no training in any underground work, nothing. He just had a sense of the man's humanity to man. So upon arrival in Marseille, he went immediately to the American consulate, and there he was shocked. He saw lines and lines of people without papers, and here there were doctors, lawyers, professionals, not just people without jobs, professional peoples and lines. And he at first joined the line and said, I'm helping these. He went to the head of the line. The gentleman said, go back. And he said, look, I'm here to help. I have papers from the president. So he said, have a seat. Another man came out, and he said, go back to the line. So Varian Fry saw early on he'd have to accomplish his mission on his own. So he went to the Hotel Splendide, where he was recommended to have a room, and that's where he set up his office. Now, how was he going to find these people? Well, word slowly goes out, and before you know it, there is a message out that there's an American who has some visas to give out. So among the first who came were Dr. Justice Rosenberg, and he also was the reason I got involved with Varian Fry, because Justice Rosenberg, now a professor, he's around 92 at Bard, head of the English department, he spoke in Richfield. Yes, in Richfield, because eventually Fry moved to Richfield. I want to get ahead of myself. But that's how I met Justice Rosenberg, and I just had an email from him today because he applauds what we're trying to do. That's to get Varian Fry honored. At any rate, Justice Rosenberg was 16 at the time. He'd been studying in Paris, and he knew that he had to get out of Paris. So he had no papers, and he came to the office, and he very soon was very important in the office because Justice was very Aryan looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, and his role in this whole office was to deliver the passports because it would be easy for him to be on the streets and not picked up because he was so German looking. Another very important person working in this office, well, at the time he hadn't achieved this, his name was Otto Hirschman. And Otto Hirschman just died last year. And what were his achievements after? He helped form the Marshall Program. And he also worked as a professor at Harvard and at Princeton. So these were the kind of people who had no passports, no papers, that were working. And there were maybe 7, 8 people in that office. How did he get them out? Because originally Fry thought he could perhaps use boats to get them to Portugal, but soon the Mediterranean was patrolled by the Germans and the French, and the Italians as well. So the most used route was over the Pyrenees. So he dressed a lot of these refugees as vineyard workers to get them over into Spain and where they would find freedom. They also developed the tubogram. Has anybody ever heard of the tubogram? Well, this was later in the 13 months they stayed, found it very difficult to communicate to the office on 42nd Street. So they got toothpaste tubes. And inside the toothpaste tubes, they put condoms, and inside the condoms were the messages. And that's how he got word, we need more visas, we need more passports. And the office, after 3 weeks, they wanted Varian Fry home. He said, I'm not coming home until you get a replacement, knowing full well there was no one that was going to volunteer. And at this point, as we get later on in the 13 months, most people don't know this, but there were 120 concentration camps throughout France. Not the rest of Europe, just alone in France. And their conditions were horrendous. There's seats in the front if you want to come. There's just up front. Their conditions were horrendous. The food was practically non-existent. There was no toilet paper, no sanitation pads, straw to sleep in, so when it rained, the straw got wet. And the conditions were dire. Not only that, beyond after Fry came home, but I don't want to forget this. In 1942, he wrote that Hitler was planning to exterminate using these camps, and the trains were going off for the people to be gassed. That was in the papers in 1942, so our government cannot say they didn't know. We all know they knew. So again, they keep taking their time and getting money and visas to Fry. The British approach Varian Fry. They have airmen that are imprisoned and they're hiding throughout the country. And they offer Varian Fry $10,000 to try to get these airmen out. Now that was another very illegal step on Fry's part, but he needed that money to keep these refugees afloat. And the other point is that he housed some of these refugees in warehouses because the people would be safe there. So he used all kinds of methods to save people. Finally, his passport ran out, and he had to leave. But before I get to that, I want to talk very briefly about Marc Chagall, one of the more famous people that he saved. Marc Chagall was living in a little village, Gourds. Some of you may have been there, a lovely place in France. And he told Marc Chagall that his life was in danger. And Marc Chagall said, but there's no cows in New York, because as you all know, that's what he painted. And Varian Fry shrugged his shoulders and did his best. A few weeks later, he gets a call from Chagall's wife saying, my husband's in prison, please, can you help? So Varian Fry quickly uses his brains again, his brilliance, and he speaks to the head of that police station and he says, look, if you don't let Chagall go, the world will be on top of you, because not only is he beloved in France, he's world known. So obviously he was released. And Marc Chagall came to Fry's office and thanked him and said, yes, help me get out. And another person who got out, who you may be familiar with Mahler's work, alma mater, Gustav Mahler's first wife, escaped with some of her husband's unpublished work, plus she brought in her suitcase Bruckner's Third Symphony. So you see today, there are so many people that he saved. And on a personal note, among the people I've met on this journey to know more about Varian Fry is Fred Stein. I met Peter Stein, his son, who's a professor at NYU. He's head of the graduate school cinematography. And Fred Stein took photographs of people like Albert Einstein, George O'Keeffe, many, many famous people. Just this week, I received this book of his father's work, Fred Stein's work, of a retrospective, his first retrospective of his work at the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And the book is dedicated to our Varian Fry, our neighbor, okay? That nobody knows about. So we have so many artists today that brought culture to New York City, and we're known as the cultural capital. This wouldn't be if we hadn't had all those giants. So now I'm going to take you to Marseille, and you'll want to leave there real soon, and my friend David here. And by the way, I thank David and Bonnie, just as the rabbi did, for helping this program. And we also have treats after, so if you can bear to stay, we do have refreshments. So when the movie will begin, and I'll get out of the way. I'm sure you will agree with me that Varian Fry should be honored, not in Vermont, Texas, right here in Fairfield County. This is where he lived his adult life, where he was schooled, as I illustrated to you. Now, what happened when he came back to this country? You'd think he'd be a hero. Well, he returned to the offices of the Emergency Rescue Committee, and they were very annoyed with him because he started ordering them around. He forgot he was no longer in charge of that office and what they were doing. But he knew back in Marseille how the small staffed office needed every minute of their work. They were not aware somehow of the dangers that those office staff faced every day. They were under Gestapo watch. In fact, Varian Fry was in prison twice. They really had a difficult time because Varian worked from 8 till midnight. They were working 9 to 5. And so when he started bossing them around, he didn't really appreciate it. And Roosevelt further said, if Fry's still in the office, no more visas. So there was a parting of the ways after several months. And in his personal life, his marriage with Eileen was never ideal. When she had secretly hoped he'd come home with an orphan child, that was impossible. He just about got out himself. And within the year, their marriage dissolved. They remained better friends after the marriage. And in the meantime, he took various writing posts. But it was such a downer from coming to being such an important person. And it was a very difficult adjustment for him, and also to find work. Anyway, in 1948, Eileen contacts lung cancer, and he visits her every day in the hospital, reading to her. And he's writing his book, Surrender on Demand, which I've put a few books on your list to read. You can get this on Amazon or maybe your library. This is a diary of what he did. So in 1945, this book was published. In 1948, Eileen dies. And a year after, he meets a young lady by the name of Annette. And Annette, her name's Riley. And she is the daughter of a philosophy professor at Vassar. Some books say she's 20 years younger, others say 16. However, they married, and the first years were very blissful, and they had three children, 2 boys and 1 girl. Where did they move? Richfield, Connecticut. Okay, our neighbor. And I've tried speaking there. I did speak to the Lions Club there. I spoke to the mayor there, and still nothing has been done. And I'm planning to go to Fairfield University and speak there, because I would like, and I'm sure you would agree, that he deserves a monument. The years, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the years in Richfield were difficult. He was there for 10 years. He had various jobs writing for Fortune 500 companies, press reports, business reports, etc. But it was not really his cup of tea. He wanted to go back to the classics to teach his beloved Latin and Greek. And for relaxation, he did crossword puzzles in Latin. So in the evening, he went to Fairfield University to get his teaching accreditation. And that took him 2 years. Meanwhile, he did have a permanent job at Coca-Cola. And when that finished, things were very difficult for him. And Annette wanted to move back to the city so they both could find work. And in this period, the Emergency Rescue Committee asks Fry to return to France because they need to raise money. And they thought his connections with artists, they would contribute to a book called Flight. So he's happy about that assignment, and Chagall offers him his home in Gourds and promises him an etching. Well, Varian Fry goes to many different artists, and he doesn't find the work forthcoming, and he gets very, very disappointed. He finds himself in a hospital in Cannes. They said he suffered from heart problems. On his return, he was very upset with that trip, and the family gets disrupted, and Annette decides for a divorce. And then in this period, he takes a teaching job at Joe Barlow School in West Reading, our neighbor. And then they have Annette and he have a reconciliation. He decides to go back on the weekends, come and spend with the kids. And this one particular weekend, Labor Day weekend, he goes back to teach at Joe Barlow. Well, that Monday, the school calls Annette, "Where's Varian?" She said, "Call the police." The police went, Detective Schwartz, and finds Varian Fry alone, dead in bed. And he suffered from a massive heart attack at the age of 59. And this death was not expected. He was living in a home on Center Street in Easton, and a friend of mine is going to see if the street could be named after him in Easton. And why I'm so happy we have a nice crowd. I have a book for signatures, and maybe if you might know of a friend who would want to do a painting pro bono or a sculpture, we need to have a monument to keep this man's name alive. And I'd like to read very quickly what Warren Christopher, the United States Secretary of State under Clinton's first admission, wrote. This was at Yad Vashem. Yeah, I have to go back a little. He was honored in very few places. Only one place Varian Fry was honored in this country, and that's in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where they give yearly scholarships in his name. The library that I keep in touch with has an active archive on him, as does Columbia University, and that donated all his papers to Columbia. And also, there's, in addition to monuments, there's a street in Ridgewood, New Jersey, to Varian Fry. So if you visit Ridgewood, they know the name Varian Fry. The only other place that has honored him is the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And abroad, the French, as you saw, gave him the highest honor, the Cross de Chauvet, and also streets were named after him in France and in Germany. When Fry would have been 100, Annette, his wife, was attended the honorarium for him in France when they named a street in Marseille for him. And Yad Vashem is missing from that flyer. Yad Vashem gave him the honor of righteous among the nations. And for you, those of you who do not know what this means, it is Israel's highest honor given to a non-Jew for them saving a Jewish life. So here we have this was taken. That last exhibit, the Holocaust Museum had a traveling museum that went out around 13 times, maybe a little more. And I pleaded with them, please let this exhibit come to Connecticut. Well, they didn't, and the last one was in Ramapo College, where I went 2 years ago. And I took photographs. There's more photographs outside from that exhibit, so that they wouldn't eternally be resting in the bowels of that museum. So here we have Warren Christopher, 1956, Secretary of State, planning and honoring Varian Fry. And Varian Fry's son, James, was at that wonderful honorarium. Anyway, this is what was said. I wish to pay tribute to Varian Fry, a remarkable man and a remarkable American. Regretfully, during his lifetime, his heroic actions never received the support they deserved from the United States government, particularly the State Department. Even today, Varian Fry's tale of courage and compassion is too little known by his own countrymen. And then he goes on to say, every life that Varian Fry rescued was precious, but among those he saved were some of the greatest artists, and I also rescued the ordinary. We owe Varian Fry our deepest gratitude, but we also owe him a promise never to forget the horrors that he struggled against so heroically, and a promise to do whatever is necessary to ensure that such horrors can never happen again. And with that, I'll close, and I'll ask you all, if you have in mind an artist, a sculptor, who would do something for Varian Fry pro bono, if you might have a suggestion where he could be honored, so his name and deeds will live on. Because I'm not going to be around forever, and the people who are still surviving, among them, at Thanksgiving time, I had Jeanette Berman. Varian Fry saved Jeanette. She and her mother and father were saved. And she was at our Thanksgiving dinner because she lives 15 minutes from my nephew. So these people, their days are numbered. And so I would like you to carry on the story of Varian country. I just want us here, where he loved and lived.